Hello everyone, seems that we are on air. So I would like to welcome you to Xpressions. Xpressions is a brand new series of engaging futuristic events around tech, powered by Owiwi's Learning Center. But when we say futuristic tech events, we mean an expansive lineup of stellar speakers, case studies, panel discussions, unique presentations, with the sole purpose to provide their viewers with access to a wealth of industry leading knowledge, best practices, experiences, and trends that are shaping our society and world at large. We would like to exchange valuable information and insights with prestigious thought leaders and game changers, and learn from the best on how you can tackle new challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Our first event is titled Who Controls the Internet? And I would like to welcome our first expressionist, Vassilis Tziokas, which he's actually one of the people that I really follow so many years. So I'm really happy that he's going to be the first expressionist. He's the global industry lead for data and AI solutions at Microsoft. Welcome, Vassilis.
Hello, Afna. Hello, everyone. Very happy and excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Vasilis, I would like to have a small intro. Would you like to explain a little bit more to our audience? Who are you? What are you doing? And why you are relevant to the topic of our event today?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. Let me start with the final question. I think expertise is something very subjective. It's very far from my personal philosophy to call myself expert in pretty much anything. I am someone who is passionate about internet. I have been working in one of the largest software companies in the world, and that's why I probably have some interesting or insightful ideas about the topic of discussion today. So that's the answer on your last question. A very quick intro from my side. Yeah, my name is Vassilis. Leading the industry strategy for our data and AI solutions in Microsoft. I'm currently based in Seattle. Actually, to be accurate, I'm currently in Greece for some family reasons, but I am based in Seattle, where the Microsoft HQ is located. Um, Outside Microsoft, I am a mentor for Endeavor Greece. I'm sure that the audience is pretty aware of Endeavor and how it's an organization that helps entrepreneurs and global thinkers to grow their businesses. And very recently, I also became an ambassador for Aragon. Aragon is an organization, a non-profit organization, which promotes and encourages I would say the decentralized technologies, which I believe will be one of the key topics of our discussion today. So that's pretty much about myself.
So thank you so much, Vasilis. I will get back to Aragon a little bit later as the flow of our discussion goes there. So the topic of our discussion today it's going to be who controls the internet. So I
Mhm.
find that very rational to begin from the fact actually what is the internet in order to define that and then explore who is actually controlling that and if it's controlling that. So what is the internet for you, Vasilis?
Yeah, again, those questions, I think, and I suppose that's the appeal of the discussion today. They're very fundamental questions, and they're not very easy answers. These are questions which starts on a business, on a regulation, on a policy, on a even a philosophical level. But there are some tangible explanations we can definitely give, right? So, internet, it's not me who will define it, but internet is the network of networks, if I may call it this way, right? It started in 60s, around 60s race, and it was a US military project back then, just to connect the networks for US Army operations. And then, it grew, it was developed, and now it is actually what dictates our everyday life, regardless of what we're doing. It has become this umbrella, I would say, this invisible umbrella, but very real one that, we do business, we connect, we share our life, and many of us we make our living. So that's what the internet is for me. It's an invisible umbrella with very realistic applications in real life.
So, based on what you said, so does anyone owns internet physically or virtually?
Uh, I mean, again, very. It's a philosophical question. We can unpack it during the conversation. I mean, owning the internet, again, there are many layers on how we can answer that question. Let me start with the most, I would say, the most real answer, which is yes. I mean, internet as as a phenomenon, it is currently being dominated by a few very big organizations, right? Profit organizations, right? Companies, right? You name it: Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft. These are companies that we are all aware of, and they own, again in quotation marks, the word own, a very big part of what we call the internet. Then there is a more idealistic, I would say, answer to the question, which is, internet is owned by the people, right? Because if we, me, you, the audience, each one of us is not on the internet, those companies, they don't have any reason to exist, right? So again, it's not an easy answer, and I don't think there is an answer, right? It's how you approach it. There's definitely the business and the capitalistic, I would say, side of things, which is yes, there's a few companies which own a big part of it, but also there's a very more soft side on the answer, which is, it is owned by the people, right? By each one of us. That we live, we interact, and we perform any kind of activity online.
So, what about the data? Because when we speak about internet, there's a huge discussion around data, and when we discussion on GDPR, we can start the discussion on personal data, on privacy. So it's a huge topic. But by the end of the day, to us, that we're just citizens, we're just simple people. Who monitors the data, and in which area do you believe that we are safe, we should be cautious, we should be skeptical, and what's the connection between those ones that control the internet and the data part of the whole ethical thing, let's say?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, Again, many elements on the answer. So let me start with the basics one, right? So um, first of all, I'm very happy that you didn't use the metaphor that many people are using, to which I am not a very big fan of, which is, data is the new oil. That's what everybody says, and
Too
I'm not a
mainstream.
very I'm not a very. Thank you for avoiding this. This this very usual, I would say, comparison, because I actually data is not like oil. It's even more valuable, and I would say it's even more than water, because oil has some uh, technical difficulties on how you can transport it, etc. So I don't agree with that comparison. But yeah, I mean, each one of us, actually, right now, as we speak, we create data, right? The fact that, Sotiris, Athena, Vassilis are in a call, we have clicked attend in an event on LinkedIn or on Facebook, that creates data, right? So each one of us is a generator of data, right? And of course, there are different layers on the data. Some of the data are more personal, are more, I would say, sensitive. Each user has a different level of sensibility when it comes to how he or she uses their data. But yes, the data right now, um, again, it goes back to my first answer. A big proportion of the data is owned by the centralized companies that we all use for, right? Google is for Gmail or for our Google searches, um, Facebook for whatever we do on Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, right? And this is not any kind of critique for any of those companies, but it is true that those data belong to them companies, and actually they use them for business reasons, right? They either use them to build business models or to exchange data with other providers, and how they can extract value from it. So short answers, each one of us creates data. Most of the data is being created, is being owned by those huge companies. However, there are some very interesting, I would say, how can I call it? There's an interesting evolution on what data is online and how we can make a better and smarter use. I think each one of us knows and has heard the news about the last years about how Facebook has manipulated the US elections, and how Russia has intervened in some of the other countries. And I want to avoid the political side of those things, but it is true, right? I mean, there are many examples and even scandals, if I may say, of how data has been used not in an ethical and transparent way by some of the companies I mentioned before, right? And how we can avoid in the future situations like this. So there are some interesting examples. You also mentioned, before I give the floor back, Athena, you mentioned, GDPR. That's the policy, right? That's the regulation side of data, right? So what each country or each, I would say, government or institution, in that case, it's European Union, what is doing to avoid situations like that. So European Union has decided to enforce GDPR. I think it was enforced 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5 years ago, which is a general data um, product protection regulation. And we can discuss as much as we want if this is an effective regulation or not, if it has brought the results that we believe it is. But it's an example of how European Union is managing that. US has a different way. China has a different way. So there's not a universal, I would say, answer on how the data should be used. It's based on the context, the time, and the geography, and the politics at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Vassilis. And it's really interesting what you mentioned because I have a very simple example from our event. When we created the theme and the title, actually, Facebook was not allowing us to boost the event because we had mentioned the US elections. So it was recognizing that we mentioned that example like the US elections and how they were affected by data. So every time that we were trying to boost this specific ad, Facebook was banning that. So even from this
Okay.
very simple example, we understand that by the end of the day, whatever we say, there's a monitoring of the data, and we see that we are in an era that nobody knows where is the border to that. I think that there's no border anymore, even on the positive or negative side. I'm not pretty sure that we do have borders of control. And if we do, my next question would be, what is the role of the big companies, the big players? And my next question after that is going to be, what do you believe that is the role of the smallest ones like tech startups around the internet? So I would like to
Yeah.
have the two sides of the coin. Do you believe that the very, very big companies right now are really affecting, and what's their role in what we call the power of influence in the internet?
Yeah, sure. And look, I mean, I will be honest, right? I am part of big tech. I am part of one of the big companies, right? I'm working for Microsoft, and actually, I'm very proud of working for Microsoft because, and I don't want to make this discussion a promotion for Microsoft. That's not my intention. I'm here as Vassilis, not as a Microsoft employee, but I'm using Microsoft as an example of a company which is intentionally trying to use very ethical, transparent, and fair rules on how to use data. But again, this is not Microsoft is not the center of my answer. So to your question, like it goes without question, Athena. Of course, they influence. Of course, they influence how data is collected. They have their own policies. They have huge lobbying mechanisms and teams, right? Sitting in Washington D.C. trying to influence policymaking and new regulations and laws, right? That goes without saying. This is something which is true and public. It's not any. I'm not giving you any confidential information for that. And I believe that we don't know the answer, right? Meaning that it's an evolution. The last 2 years, actually the last 5 years, uh, and again, I'm using the US example because US is where most of those companies are being centered, right? Have their HQ offices because of the Trump election and the January 6th Capitol riot. And again, I don't want to go into the politics, but we all witnessed the dilemmas that companies like Facebook or Google or Twitter had. Right? And I'm using those companies not because I am, because they're much more consumer focused rather than Microsoft or Amazon, right? So we witnessed, right, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and all the other folks, trying to figure out what is the right way, what is the border that you set. And I think there is a hard element of that and a soft element. So the hard element is what the law says, right? What is the legal, what is the regulatory framework on how we manage data? And pretty much in the US, everything is under the First Amendment, which is the freedom of expression, right? And also, in case people do not know, there is something called Section 230. It is called the Communication and Decency Act. It's a regulation that came out from the US in 1996, and it says the following, and I'm literally reading the actual text. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as a publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. That means that whatever you write on your Facebook, Facebook is not liable for that, right? Of course, there are their own regulations, hate speech, nudity, porn, of course, right? But there's a lot of, I would say, freedom, and there is a lot of room on how those companies interpret regulations. Regulation is not, written in stone. It has a soft element. People interpret it differently. So what we witnessed, just to continue my answer, is that actually Facebook and Twitter decided that after the January 6th, for example, riot, they should ban Donald Trump from their platform, right? So this is where they put the limit. This is where they said enough is enough. That's our threshold. We believe that Donald Trump is inciting in violence, and that's why we banned him from. And actually, he's still banned, right? So that's an example of how a company, which is again a private company, uses its own rules, its own ethics, its own, I would say, rules, and at the same time respecting the legislation that the country, in that case the US, has. So it's an example of how a company was more flexible before, but after an event they changed policies. So I will not go into the rabbit hole of telling you what is the correct and the wrong answer. Actually, there's not correct or wrong answer. Each one of us has a separate opinion. It's a very ethical question. Each one of us has different ethics, right? We can argue all day long if this decision to ban Trump was a good decision or a bad decision. But this is an example. I'm just stating the fact. It's an example of a company deciding to enforce its rules for its own users.
That's a great example because by the end of the day, it highlights actually where's, as I mentioned earlier, where's the border on how a company
Mhm.
decides what is ethical or not based on their standards. And basically, you may have the right to do that, and you should have the right to do have an ethical conduct. Because my next question would be, what's the impact in our lives? And I think that indirectly you replied because it's interconnected, especially when we speak about something that applies to everyone. Most of us, a very, very big part of us, it's using social media
Yeah.
for personal but also for business purposes. And
Yeah.
as we saw that the influence in business purposes, getting also into elections and propaganda or
Correct.
not, it's very important.
Correct. There's a
I
very sorry to interrupt you. I just want to emphasize that, right? It's a very important. There's a very important effect on our everyday life. We may believe that okay, whatever it is, politics, it is Trump or Biden, doesn't matter. Who cares what I post on Facebook? But actually, there is an effect on each one of us, right? And this is like, where does the where is the line, right? Do we want to be part of a social network that decides on its own what is legal, ethical, or okay to post? You mentioned the example, Athena. You said that Facebook did not allow you to promote this event. Like, are you okay with that decision? So there is a very important element, and this on our everyday lives. And what is at stake, I would say, is democracy, right? This is, I mean, Facebook, Twitter, and all the other online, I would say, forums are right now the modern versions of Agora, what we had in ancient Greece, where it's the public forum, right? So, do we want someone to decide what is legal or ethical? It's very easy for us to go and say, yeah, ban this, ban that. Why don't you ban this, take down this? But like, when it comes to our content, we become much more sensitive, right? So again, it's a very soft question, very ethical question. Each one of us has different ethics. I say there's a minimum thing that I believe we all agree, and I hope we all agree, which is the respect to liberal democracy, to respect and to integrity on how we treat each other, right? So that's, I would say, something that I believe and I hope we all agree on.
Thank you so much for the clarification. It's actually it gets into the thoughts that I had that actually it's a relationship two ways, meaning that we as users actually affect internet in a very big proportion, I would say. But at the same time, we say that the world's users control the internet. But at the same time, increasingly, certain countries like let's say China, they have been reported for abusive control over
Mhm.
the use of the internet, also telecommunication companies. But at the
Correct.
same time, in the past, we thought that it was only China, but now we can see that it's not, and the barriers are everywhere around us. So you mentioned a very, very important word, and I will get into something that you really know well: democratizing. So I would like to ask you a little bit more about Aragon, because as far as I saw from the description, it's about democratizing and decentralization. So, would you like to
Yeah.
explain a little bit more to our audience what is Aragon, what is actually doing, and why you're ambassador of something like that?
Yeah. And before I explain what Aragon is, which, and by the way, each one of you, hopefully that you are listening or watching this conversation, you can, go and visit the website yourself. I think it's aragon.org, if I'm not mistaken. Let me start with one step before, right? Before Aragon. So coming back to your previous question, Athena, like, so where is the limit? Who decides? Like, are we okay with Facebook deciding what is legal and ethical and permissible? So I think the answer to that question is not to have someone, either a person or a company deciding. I think the answer, because this is not sustainable, we cannot expect Facebook to monitor each and every piece of content generated around the world. It's literally non-doable, even by algorithms and AI, right? So I would say that the answer is how we decentralize, how we are not reliable to one person, one board of directors, or whatever that might be, in order to make those decisions, right? And decentralization is something which is very popular the last months on the internet. Other people call it Web3, other people call it blockchain, other people call it crypto, right? But it's this idea of decentralizing access and ownership. There is not a single owner, there is not a centralized power deciding those important, I would say, things. So that's the context of my answer. Now, the more tangible answer to your question, Aragon is a non-profit organization whose aim is to democratize and promote decentralized technologies, right? And more importantly and more accurately, DAOs. DAOs stands for decentralized autonomous organizations. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Actually, I'm a big fan. I'm watching the space. Nobody's an expert in decentralized technologies. We are all becoming experts as we speak, day by day. So DAOs is a new way to form communities, to form organizations, to form teams which are not owned by a single person or by two people or by three people, but literally it is decentralized governance, right? It's a very interesting. I don't think we'll have the time to go into the technical part of it, and I'm not the expert on the technical part of it. But imagine, for example, if you want to build um, a team that is interested about, I don't know, buying a piece of land rather than you being the person who owns all the shares of that community or that organization. You decentralize it to every person who is part of the community, and you have very digital democratic voting systems and decentralized, I would say, methods to come to decisions, to vote, and to resolve potential conflicts.
Highly interconnected, I would say, with the part of ethics. So I feel that it's a little bit practical, but at the same time very romantical on how you want to be implemented an ethical standard on how we use technology, because democratization
Mhm.
it's really connecting with high ethical standards on how we move with technology. So it would get into where this world of technology is going, the future of technology, I would say. So we would like it to be a little bit more kind of regulated on the right standards,
Correct.
right?
Correct. And the way I see it is literally in three circles, right? The beginning of the internet, what we call Web 1, was super centralized. Like if you may remember, I do not know how old each one of the audience is, but like in before the Facebook era, the internet was very big websites that we were visiting to, read the news. We were going to www, I don't know, CNN.com, and we were reading the news. So it was centralized. Someone was providing content to the internet users. Then Web 2 came around the middle of the previous decade, actually of the 2000s, and we had the first social media, right? What MySpace, High Five, Facebook, Twitter, right? And that was Web 2. The difference between Web 1 and Web 2 is that the centralized companies like CNN or the media agencies did not create the content. It was the user who were creating the content. Me, you, Sotiris, we were posting our status updates, we were putting our photos. So users create content, but the ownership of the content is still on the centralized companies like Facebook. Now, Web 3, which actually is at the very early stages, what we witness is that nobody owns. It's owned by the community, right? There are many interesting examples of new social media. I don't want to say the names because it will sound like I'm advertising them, but there are many very interesting examples of social media which do not have a centralized authority, right? So I believe the Web3 will be all about democratization. And I wouldn't say more ethical because, again, ethics is a very subjective and personal thing. I don't want to go into the ethical discussion because my ethics might be different than yours, but it's definitely more egalitarian, more democratized, and more democratic, if I may say.
After this live, I feel that Facebook is gonna ban me forever because I think you don't have. So
No, it's no, they won't. They won't. And by the way, I don't want to sound like someone who, I hate Facebook or I consider them the source of bad. It's a company which is a great company. They have some very, very tough decisions to make. So sometimes we need to think like if we were in their shoes, what will we do? It's not an easy decision, right? Definitely they have made some mistakes, but it's not about trying to burn them in hell, right? Facebook is a terrible and evil company. It is a company which is adapting to the new reality, and I think they're doing their best, at least.
So thank you for that because after that they're not gonna ban me.
Okay, good.
So I would hearing what you mentioned earlier. I think that I'm not pretty sure by the end of the day if this kind of efforts and democratization of information and control believe in self-regulatory
Hmm.
actually tech or not. So this is a huge topic for another live. I think if tech should be self-regulatory or not, because then we're gonna lose it.
Yeah, but let me quickly, if you allow me, quickly comment on that. I think self-regulation is a very hard word, and yes, it's a very how can I say? It's a very it has many layers, so we need a different call to unpack it. But I would say that self-regulation, from a philosophical point of view, it is something that each one of us should have. Actually, me as Vassilis, I'm a very big advocate of that. We are all part of the internet, right? It is not some other people who create the bad content and the polarized content and etc. Blah blah. It is each one of us who should have this. It's called the art of self-government. We should be very mindful of what we put online, right? We should be very respectful, we should be very careful, and we should always think before we post, because we may harm someone even if we don't want to. We may promote something which is a very dangerous idea. So I think if each one of us self-regulates, in quotation marks, right, or and being very mindful before we post, then it will be a much better place. So there is a soft element of self-regulation, not the legal side of it.
Yeah, do you believe that, based on what you said earlier, do you believe that human rights groups, like including the UN, they should start having a voice over that, start listing the names of internet companies who aid the repressive governments with restrictive controls? Do you believe that their role should actually be involved in that?
I believe that our institutions, that might be European Union, United Nations, US, Congress, you name it. It doesn't have a geographical border. They should they should adapt to the new reality, right? If you think about it, most constitutions of most countries, the Greek constitution, the US constitution, these are documents that were written hundreds of years ago, but they still dictate today's problems, right? So, we're trying to solve the Facebook, problem, if I may call it this way, with something that some founding fathers in 18th century wrote. It's a very difficult thing, right? So I believe that we slowly, as humanity, as a global community, we become smarter, right? One of the digital thinkers that I trust a lot, um, is a person who actually created the Netflix show Black Mirror. I think he said something which actually resonates with me very well, which says that, it's like we grew a new finger in our hand, right? We need to get used on how to use it, right? It's very new. We didn't have social media at 15 years ago. It seems like we had these issues forever, but we didn't, right? So this is a very new thing. It takes time to adapt, and until we do, there will be some pitfalls, there will be some challenges, there will be some problems. But I believe that our institutions will slowly adapt. They will be modernized to the new problems, to the new realities. And there are right now non-profit organizations and non-profit think tanks which actually promote this kind of, I would say, ethical and digital democracy. If you allow me, this is not again a promotion because it's a non-profit. Another community that I am part of, and I'm very proud that I'm part of, is Radical Exchange. It's not a very famous community. I would highly encourage you to go and Google it or Bing it. But it's
Change?
Radical Exchange, yes, and it's a political movement, but nothing to do with actual political party. They're not going to be elected. It's like a think tank. It's about people, digital thinkers across the world who are trying to create a more egalitarian and a more equal and democratic digital ecosystem. They have many concepts. One of their concepts is actually how we can use data. It's called data dignity, right? So how each one of us can use his or her own data in a more ethical, but also in a more beneficial way for the individual, not for the company. So again, there are many examples. Radical Exchange is one of them that I am part of. That's why I'm sharing it. But you mentioned United Nations. This is an example of an old institution, right? An old organization. It's a great organization. They're doing amazing stuff. But I believe we will see newer and more, I would say, innovative organizations fighting for the common good in the near future.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. I didn't know Radical Exchange, and I'm definitely gonna check it out because it seems that it has a good combination of a more philosophical but also practical implementation on how you view
Yeah.
things. So I would really love to do. So based on what you have seen and exchanged opinions and discussed, what do you believe that are the biggest challenges for internet in on 2022? Now on. So based on what we discussed, for example, I heard you saying about the adaptation of all those
Yeah.
new things.
I would say so. You use the word challenges. The fact that we will evolve our internet in this, in my opinion, in this decentralized model, it's not a challenge, it's a reality, right? It's evolution. Evolution, by definition, is something new. So it's not a challenge, it is a new reality. I wouldn't call it a challenge. What I believe is a challenge, or at least where I believe is a little bit of a scary scenario, is the idea of having national internets. And I know it sounds very weird when you say that, but actually we see that. Let me explain what I mean. Right now, European Union has a very different internet regulation than the US, and the US has a different regulation than the Chinese government, and India has a different regulation. So actually we see different spheres. The actual experience that you have when you are in Greece of Facebook versus or whatever company versus when you are in China is different because in China they may have some blockers, they may have some filters, they may not allow something, right? And that so the challenge that I see, and I'm very scared that this will might be the case, is that the governments will create internet spheres based on their own philosophies, their own politics. For example, Chinese they may have a more strict, right, policies. US might have a more libertarian policies, and we will see different internets, right? So the same website will either be banned or will have different rules according to where you are. So for me, that's very scary because internet, by definition, is something which is very democratic. It's something which is given equally to everyone, right? So for me, that's the challenge: how internet can keep its very open and its very egalitarian nature versus, the desires of some, governments or people who don't want to promote common good, but they want to promote their own agendas. For me, that's a challenge.
Thank you so much. And I see that we have some questions, so I would like to set the scene by saying that if you have your questions, please send them over now. The first
Mhm.
question is, what about in the case of Facebook content moderators? These people
Mhm.
tend to exert great influence in the content that it can be viewed or rejected accordingly, those
Mhm.
influencing to an extent to what are we exposed on the internet and
Mhm.
subjecting us to potentially their own biases. So, what do you believe about that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't think it's what I believe; it's what is real, right? It goes back to what I said before. Facebook, by definition, and again, I don't want to centralize it to Facebook. It seems like I have something up with Facebook. I don't have anything up with Facebook. But it's like the content that is being uploaded to Facebook every day is so much because everyone is on Facebook pretty much, right? that you cannot moderate it realistically. You need to use either humans, in that case the content moderators, which in my humble opinion it's not a scalable it's not a scalable thing. And actually we have heard and we have read reports that many of those people have a lot of psychological pressure, and actually some of them have committed suicide. So you need to have either people or machines, right? AI and algorithms to monitor the content and put it down, right? So it is the reality. It's not what I believe, right? It is it is something which Facebook is trying to do to solve these problems. In my humble opinion, it's not scalable, and it will never be enough because the context always changes. Let me give you an example. If you wrote something last November about, if you use the word riot and Congress, it will be okay. After January 6th, the context changed. We had something. People stormed the US Capitol. So after January 6th, the same exact status update might be dangerous. So how can you keep updating the context? Right? There's something very human on how we use language. It's the idea of context. Words do not always have the same meaning according to where we live and according to the era. So that's why for me it's not scalable to have people monitoring the content every day. It's non-realistic. And this is what I believe, and I don't want to drill down on that because it will become very policy oriented. There's a very interesting proposition by Francis Fukuyama. For those who do not know, Francis Fukuyama is very famous. He's a historian and an academic. He's famous for his line, "The end of history," right? He's teaching at Stanford. And what he says, what he proposes, is that maybe this moderation of Facebook, of Twitter, should be given to third-party companies so that you give innovation to other companies, right? So, for example, there is another company called Vassilis, and I moderate the content for Facebook, and actually the user comes to me and picks if he or she thinks that I am doing a good moderation. So it's the idea of bring your algorithm with you, right? So if you like the algorithm of Vassilis company, you experience Facebook through the Vassilis company. If you like the Athena moderation algorithm, you go through the Athena. So he proposes a layer, it's called middleware, which is a very interesting idea of how you can keep innovation, keep competition, but also moderate it in a more scalable way.
This is we learned so many things that we didn't know today, and one of the things that I was reading recently about that, it's a phrase that any question about control of the internet that starts with who immediately loses interest because large
Exactly.
complex distributed systems are not controlled by who's by the end of the day. So I think that gets into in a more again philosophical sphere on that, and one of the questions that I can see, and I mean, again, it turns into circles. If there are specific companies that, if they decided that they would like to take over the control of the internet, if you believe that they could do that, I think that
We
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 already
we we
replied to that.
we we saw that. I think we saw that after, and again, I keep coming back to this example because it's the most recent one. After January 6th, right? The internet pretty much banned Donald Trump. It was not just Facebook, right? He did not have access to anything, pretty much, right? He could not even create a WordPress, a blog. I'm not going of whether this is wrong or right. I'm not judging this, right? I don't want to sound like someone who is sympathetic to Donald Trump. I'm just saying that it's an example of how actually you can, put a black curtain. Right? Edward Snowden, right, the guy who the whistleblower from the U.S. who revealed some of the greatest NSA scandals. He's pretty much banned right now. Right now, he has a Twitter account, but like, yes, if you don't have access to the 5, 6 major internet services like Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you're pretty much banned. Like, how can you share your voice if you don't have access to these public agoras? So that's what I was saying before, right? It is problematic that a very big part of internet is owned by 5, 6, 7 companies, but it is the reality.
Yeah, and by the end of the day, if we could speak with specific examples, because this is something again that I can see being written in the comments. It's like SoftBank. We know we have heard a lot
Hmm.
that owns more than 50% in most of the companies that they have
Hmm.
IPOs in the U.S. Stock exchange market. So when you have more than 40% in the biggest players in the market globally, I don't think that someone could say that you cannot have influence or that there are specific players that they don't have. I would like to say they can affect the result. So
Yeah.
even if we say that we are all equal online, on paper, we would say that some people are more equal than others, or some states, like the U.S. states, are more equal than others.
Probably.
So
And then I know there may be some questions, and probably we're approaching the end of the call, but I want to mention another side of things, which is, I think, very important. The fact that a few companies own a big part of internet is problematic, of course, but I would say there is something more problematic to that, which is how those companies make money, right? It's a famous advertising business model, right? I go to Facebook. Facebook is giving their services to me for free. I don't pay anything. But what I pay is that they give my data to advertisers and I see, digital ads. So for me, that's probably more problematic. There is not a lot of innovation on how those companies make money. So by the time that you rely on data to make money, you will end up in very unfortunate situation, right? So for me, that's something which is very rarely discussed. But the digital advertising business model, when it's so reliant on how those companies make money, it becomes a problem. It becomes a challenge. And there are some very interesting decentralized examples. Um, the example I will say, and you can, each one of you in the audience, I will highly encourage you to go and click about it. It's a new browser called Brave, exactly as you hear it, Brave, right? So if you go and download that browser, you will see that they have um, a token called BAT, Basic Attention Token. And what this browser does is that for every advertisement you see, it gives you tokens, it gives you money. So you are compensated for the attraction you give to advertisers. It's a very interesting example. I do not know if it will succeed, it's very new, but it's an example of how you can give power back to users and not to the advertisers.
amazing. Thanks so much, Vasily. And we have one last question, and we will then sum up and close that. It's: do you believe that the big five players, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, have too much control over the next wave of innovation through constant acquisitions and in-house developments? Should this worry us?
Yes, that's a huge topic. It's the topic of competition and the antitrust. I would say topic that we discuss. Look, it's a very I don't want to. It's not that I am afraid or I'm concerned, but it's a very complex. Again, it's a very complicated issue because it has a lot of policy making and regulatory frameworks, right? I believe, as I said before, it is problematic that those companies own such a big part of it, right? Acquisitions like the one of Instagram from Facebook, or like you name it, right? It is problematic in my humble opinion. I wouldn't say that the answer is necessarily to break them up, as it's being called, right? Break up the big tech, right? Make it small parts. I don't necessarily agree with that because there are many reports which show that actually the productivity will go down if that happens, and we will not have the results that we believe that we will have. Again, my theory as a person, as an individual, is very close to what I said before about Francis Fukuyama. Actually, I will send you the link, Athena, in case you want to post it on Facebook or on the event page, because it's like a 10 pages paper. It's not very long. And this guy, Fukuyama, it's not a guy, it's one of the best academics in the world. He actually suggests some very good ideas on how we can increase innovation and competition without breaking up necessarily the big tech. So yes, it is problematic. I don't believe the answer is to break them up. That's my short answer to your question.
Thank you so much, Vassilis. And I would say that now we can sum up and close our first event. I would really, really like to thank you for everything. I learned a lot of new things, and I feel that a lot of our audience too. I would really like to have also the link that you mentioned from Fukuyama. I'm keeping from that this is a huge topic. There are no specific answers, but I think that bringing those questions into the table creates a form of democratizing, as we said, the whole process. So once again, thank you so much for being with us, and I would like to call you to our next expressions next month. Stay updated, follow our social media, and we will announce our next speaker for next month.
Thank you, Athena. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.